So without further ado, here's Greg.
Hello, folks, and welcome to yet another JumpCloud webinar. We're happy to have you here today. What we're going to discuss today is our integration with Office 365 and some of the efficiencies you may not have been aware of as it relates to our product's deep integration with Microsoft's new cloud-forward architecture, both Azure AD and, of course, Office 365. My name is Greg Keller. I'm the company's Chief Product Officer and the person responsible for the product that many of you are using right now. I see a number of our great customers out there. And for those that aren't customers, we hope that you extract a lot of value in what you're about to see here today. As for an agenda, if I do my job right, I want to get you folks into this webinar, educated, and out in, let's say, 30 to 45 minutes. We'll keep it super crisp and effectively talking really about product. Our company does webinars that vary in content and sort of scope. Sometimes you'll see us talk on wide market matters. Other times, like today, we're going to talk a little bit about that, but really spend time based upon the feedback and requests from both prospects and customers to really scope in on the product itself and what it can do, how it performs, and the advantages that you as customers and those evaluating the product can, of course, extract value out of the product. So what are we going to discuss today? We're going to talk a little bit about the marketscape, specifically about Office 365. Frankly, it's going to be driven from, selfishly, from many, many conversations that I have had personally with folks who are coming on board as JumpCloud customers and the challenges that they've had. So I will be more or less relaying those experiences about the adoption, about what challenges they faced in decisions sort of criteria about why they're looking at not only Office 365, but how to really manage, an integrated identity solution that sort of integrates, Office 365 tightly with the rest of their infrastructure. In fact, of course, that's the softball on the tee for us with our product. Then we're going to go and do a deep dive on JumpCloud's integration. I'm going to walk you through the technical nuts and bolts of how we did what we did. Of course, not giving away the secret sauce, but really so you have a fundamental understanding on how the puzzle pieces fit together and the sort of very simple approach that we have chosen to give you a highly secure and efficient integration between Office 365 and your identity management solution, JumpCloud. Of course, we'll do a technical demo so you get to see the bits in action. And time permitting, I want to crank through as many questions as we can get in the amount of time that we have today. So without further ado, let's jump into this bad boy. All right, let's talk about adoption. And I'm going to rip through real quickly sort of the, many of you will sort of get a snooze, but I want to bring to light some market-driven data on this that, frankly, I found fascinating. So in terms of the market, it's a two-horse race. You like my boxing gloves? This is my little way of articulating the war that we're seeing out in the landscape. Microsoft on the left, Google Apps on the right. But guess what? We see, frankly, a majority of our customers using both of these technologies. And I'll, in fact, be showing you the integration between these in just a bit. But again, back to the market, the very sort of meta about this market is this. From an adoption perspective, we're seeing Google over the last year and a half really making huge strides. I mean, Google, we are Google customers. These guys make things incredibly efficient for us as a very cloud-forward company. Our collaboration and communication is largely wrapped around the axle of Google, like many of you, and it works great. And the adoption in the field is seeing those results. Not a bad year-over-year progress marker for a company like Google, roughly 16% to roughly just under 23% gains. But when you look at what Microsoft is doing, it's arguably even more impressive. From 2014, these guys held a tick turd of market share in terms of the global landscape. Over the past year and a half, these folks have radically improved their position. And there's many reasons why this has occurred, mainly their channel, their ability to execute and push product and get folks migrated to their cloud and tapping into that pre-existing, very loyal Microsoft customer base. And this, of course, is a challenge for Google. These guys are spinning up many, many new ways to channel Google for Work into either pre-existing Microsoft accounts or into the hands of, folks that are trying to get to the cloud and aren't, or already there and sort of aren't saddled with legacy infrastructure problems. We're going to talk specifically about that in a second. But again, really, really impressive work by Microsoft. And frankly, the team up there in Redmond are hedging their bets as the platform that will carry Microsoft for the next 2 decades. And that is Azure, that is Office 365, and that is getting folks to a much more cloud-forward Microsoft. Me as an old guy with gray hair, being in software R&D for the last 20 years, I've lived the Microsoft from its beginnings through everything that they are now. And this is make or break for them. So let's talk about some of these drivers. Way in the beginning of this prezo, I sort of said this is the stuff that I have learned directly by, sort of aggressively writing notes during my many conference calls with prospects and customers about, why they're choosing things. Why, and I probe them all the time. Why are our customers doing what they're doing and making the decisions in the way that they're making them? And this is kind of what bubbled up, and I'll keep it crisp so we can get to the nice, meaty technical stuff. So what we're seeing is, these drivers are, number one, of course, as mentioned, the Office 365 and Azure AD is, the lens forward for Microsoft. It's cloud first. So if you are a company that isn't saddled by, even Microsoft's own on-prem legacy infrastructure, it's a great way to sort of adopt a very lightweight, no on-prem baggage way to get your company up in the cloud and collaborating in the cloud. It's mobile first, access anywhere, all of the stuff that Microsoft sort of touts about their solution, and we hear that from our customers as well. The other is end user familiarity. This means that if you are a Microsoft customer and you're considering ways to get to the cloud and your end users frankly love the way Outlook and sort of those email systems that they've known for years behave, they're not going to have that huge of a learning curve change. Yes, there's access points that are different. There's no thick client on the Windows workstation anymore, but it's Microsoft. It tends to behave the same, and the buttons are usually where you once knew them. The other is they are really aggressive, and they have to be on a flexible deployment. What this really means is you got pathways. So you're a cloud forward company. You have wireless access points and a bunch of laptops. Great. You can just go forward with Microsoft Azure and Office 365 up in the cloud. Or you have a bunch of Windows machines and your folks really need to have those Office tools installed on their, in most cases, their Windows devices. Great, no problem. You kind of have a blend there. We can manage those things from the cloud, but still have them as thick client solutions on the endpoint, or a complete hybrid solution, meaning you're kind of a small to medium or large enterprise. You got a bunch of stuff, on-prem, likely an Active Directory or a set of domain controllers. And you kind of got to have one foot in the old world and on-prem and one foot in the new world in the Microsoft cloud. They can do that too. One really overwhelming thing that we hear from our customers is this, and frankly, I didn't really anticipate this, but it's a shrewd move by Microsoft. And what that is Office 365, even if you're not using the sort of cloud-based tooling, like the cloud-based version of SharePoint or Word or whatever, you can use this as a glorified cloud-based license management solution. Really clever. What this means is you get all the benefit of having, as mentioned, those thick client products on your desktop workstations, but you have this sort of elegant managed solution that lives up in the cloud but gives you kind of flexibility in the way that you administer licenses and you assign them to folks and the way they're purchased and subscribed to, which leads me to the next point. A lot of the sort of more financially savvy customers and prospects we teach to are reaping benefits from, the sort of CapEx to OpEx advantages. You get to depreciate things in a different way in terms of assets when you're financially modeling your business. And this subscription-based approach is a really interesting way, especially for companies at scale that are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year or more on licenses. This sort of changes the game in the way they account for their Office suite. So now, let's talk about some friction. I love me some Microsoft, but let's face it, in the conversations that I have with our good customers and prospects, there's invariably, friction points that cause pause and, frankly, makes them think about, is this the right choice? And if it is, what are the variables that we have to sort of overcome in order to make Office 365 efficient for us as an org? And first is this. I've worked for big enterprises, but the last, let's say decade, I've been building startups, and in large part, these companies have a very similar look and feel, and we'll get into the details of this in a minute, but these startups, they look all the same. They're sort of like these modern-looking offices, stand-up desks. There's no servers or workstation boxes under your desk anymore. There is no server closet, and the employee base that is moving into these job roles now have, in large part, if you're a millennial, have never used Microsoft before. They never have used Outlook. They never have used Word or Excel. In college, they have been using Google Apps, and they have a familiarity problem and a resistance issue when forced to use other things that they're not productive with. So startups are a big reason why, they're getting sort of blocked. Our Office 365 is getting blocked. They just don't want it. So those sort of modern progressive, startups are sort of, really making Google like sticky in those orgs. The other is Google itself is, if you really, are paying attention to identity and the way identity is asserted to different services, Google's really been pushing hard behind OAuth and, of course, behind that OpenID. There is a distinct reason, you guys, why you see when you go to various websites, log in with Google, use your Google creds. They want that way to propagate the Google empire, your identity managed in Google, sort of owning everything. Conversely, have you actually seen, sign in with Microsoft, Office 365? No. So that sort of outreach of a Office identity, which really is an Azure AD identity underneath the covers, isn't being utilized outside of, in large part from non-Microsoft things, right? So Google is playing a very shrewd game of, our identity is the center of the universe, and we want you to use it in as many sort of places as you possibly can, because it will always require you to come back to, as they would like to have, to their center of the universe to sort of manage everything. But as you'll see, it's not that easy. There's existing infrastructure limitations, obviously, where, you have organizations that are sort of they're trying to get to the cloud. They have all this sort of on-prem baggage. They want to release that baggage. And how is Microsoft going to work? How are we actually going to get Office 365 to work when we're trying to jettison like our Active Directory domain controllers and sort of unburden ourselves from that cost? But we still want to benefit from Microsoft's elegance up in the cloud with the Office computing tools. So that leads us to the migration hassles. How do you get there? We are sort of on-prem, want to get to the cloud. Help us get there, Microsoft. And as you'll see in a few slides, it's more complicated than probably worth in some cases. There's also security and compliance challenges. If you are a highly regulated organization, you already are, signing off from using Office 365 because you, as a highly regulated organization, need to control when backups happen, how you get access to them, and guess what? That's just not, you're on a scheduled basis with a cloud sort of service, and that's just the nature of the cloud, unless you have access through APIs to rip down, information and store it in your own, sort of logging engines, et cetera. So all of that is, really problematic for the customers that we speak with. And of course, the on-prem versus cloud forward paralysis. And that's what I want to touch on right now. Let's sort of really galvanize ourselves for a few slides before we get into the technical demo and kind of, grok the reality of what many of our customers are facing and what myself and my customer success and support team kind of are challenged with, at least what they hear from our customers and prospects every day. So I put this one slide together, and I guarantee many of you are looking at this and you're like, yep, that's what we look like right now. And what this really means is this. You've kind of got this, on the left side, you've got your sort of on-prem infrastructure. You very likely are sitting in the middle of this. You have some sort of core directory, and I bet it's an Active Directory. If not, you're somehow brave and you're managing an LDAP to manage not just Linux infrastructure, if you have that, but somehow managing corporate identity. But I would guarantee many of the folks on this call are probably 80 folks and looking for ways to say, how do we get rid of this thing? I don't want to manage domain controllers and be in the business of all the server management. We've got to get to the cloud. But surrounding your sort of core identity solution are all of these tethered things. You've got legacy apps on-prem or managed in your own virtual servers or maybe your own colo, and it could be things like Jira or critical apps, but they sort of have to be on a Windows machine and they got to be tethered to some sort of directory, and you're managing them. You probably also have local servers or NASs, and those are all tethered to the directory. You've got maybe, if you've got a technical team managing kind of Linux infrastructure, they may be slaving an LDAP and replicating from your AD, which can be done, to an LDAP server, which is sort of reaching out to cloud infrastructure like you see. Your employees on the left side of the screen may be using a myriad of different endpoints. Like some of your folks are using Windows boxes, and they love that. You may have your quote-unquote rogue employees that are like introducing Mac into your organization, but that's why I put that little exclamation point there, because it's like chewing tinfoil trying to keep that thing connected to the Active Directory server, unless you're using some extraordinarily expensive binding tools to keep that thing in sync with Active Directory, because of course it's not a Microsoft product. And Wi-Fi too. You may be using the Radius services out of AD and trying to manage that, or managing your own free Radius servers just to use a core identity and get people off of like Ethernet connections and mobile roaming around your offices. On the right side of the screen, you're probably trying to experiment with how do we get some sort of uptake on cloud applications. Like we don't need our sort of on-prem CRM anymore. We don't want to manage Sugar CRM or any of these sort of open source things. We want to move to Salesforce. How do you do that? And you got to sort of integrate all that stuff. And maybe many of you are dealing with AWS or Rackspace or sort of software, any of these public clouds, and managing infrastructure up there. So again, a slide that really is just reinforcing that we get it, we understand your challenges, and you're probably, if I slide to the next slide, trying to get to kind of an ideal state, a quote, modern cloud forward state, which is what is our we're a big company, we're hundreds if not thousands of folks, But how do we get to this pure state of like, true mobility? And our office looks like WAPs, a flexibility in any kind of computing endpoint our employees really want to use, from Mac to Windows to Linux for that matter, and get our infrastructure, even our critical production stuff, up into the cloud. And it generally starts to look and to feel like a model like you see here. If I look out at my office, which I'm doing right now, this is what JumpCloud looks like. Yes, I know it's not. We're not showing off here. We're not saddled with a bunch of on-prem legacy stuff. We began 3 years ago, so we had this sort of luxury of creating an architecture for our company based on what you see here. So again, this is sort of an ideal state of things. So let's talk now. I'm going to really start to migrate now into the world of JumpCloud and get into the meat of what we are doing vis-a-vis Office 365 and really sort of show the bits. So let's take a look first at one aspect, and that is sort of like, if JumpCloud doesn't exist and you guys are like sort of looking at Office 365 and you got to have sort of a cloud forward way to view the world, this is what Microsoft looks like. This is actually a Microsoft slide, and basically it's absolutely effective, but utilizes a number of components, like a myriad of technologies that enable sort of your core directory, in this case Active Directory, with a synchronization tool, DirSync, in order to pass that information up to the Microsoft Cloud. And it requires your management of many of these bits. Anything that you see outside, frankly, of the red box there is on you, meaning your on-prem directory and the synchronization tool to sync with the cloud-based directory of Microsoft. So again, I'm not disparaging Microsoft here. It is what it is, but there's a lot of moving parts, and it's on you to manage them. Let's move now into the world of JumpCloud. So I'm going to take you through exactly how all this works before we actually start to show you the bits and demonstrate the product. This will give you a good look under the hood, and it'll basically show you how things operate under the covers. So first and foremost, this is all cloud. On the right side, you have Office 365. I kind of riffed on their like little dotted box thing so I can show you. That's the Office Cloud thing, and they have their components. They have their API, they have their Azure AD, and then sitting on top of that, believe it or not, is Office 365. Many of you may not even know that Azure AD, there's an instance of that lives behind your tenant of Office 365. You have to enable it. You may not have ever seen it, but it's available. I'll show you this in their dashboard in a second if you're curious. But anyways, let's talk about JumpCloud. On the left side is our platform. Yes, it's all cloud-based. It is also, utilizes a very modern API-driven approach to the world. In fact, our entire product is driven from we are completely API-driven, including our own user interfaces, basically a slave to the very sophisticated API that we have sitting on top of our platform services. So let's talk through exactly what the integration does. Let's move forward. First and foremost is, how do you get this thing securely authenticated into Office 365? So we are not using any middle tier service or yet another thing you've got to manage. We're doing everything through OAuth, directly from our API layer securely to Office 365's API layer. We are big fans of OAuth. Works great. Microsoft accepts it and works wonderfully with it. And in this case, as you can see, you just need an API OAuth-driven connection. We drop the token on Office 365 with a super admin Office 365 user, and life is good. We even tell you when that token is going to expire, which unfortunately Microsoft doesn't even tell you. There is a certain 90-day rotation requirement that Office 365 requires for any token-based authentication against their service. So we tell you exactly when that expiry date is, and we'll remind you. So with the authentication secured, how does this work? So users we'll start with this use case, provisioning from JumpCloud into Office 365. So how this works is you as an admin create a user in JumpCloud through many ways. You can use the API to create them. You can go through the user interface to create them, etc. But a user is born inside of JumpCloud. We then enable you to select which user or users then get migrated across through the API instantaneously into Office 365. What you see on the right-hand screen, just to show you the mechanics behind things, what we're really doing is loading that user into the underpinned Azure AD instance, which then reflects as an Office 365 user. I'm really more or less just explaining how Microsoft Office is working on their cloud side. So we're really banging against the API, which is banging against the Azure AD instance, and then, of course, serving that to Office 365. But note, the same exact process works in reverse. So we have complete bidirectional synchronization here, which means, well, let's say you already have users in Office 365. The same thing works in reverse. You build them in O365, which creates the underpinned Azure AD user, which then gets consumed, imported by JumpCloud through the API, and guess what? You have a brand new JumpCloud user that is authoritative and will be kept in sync. It will merge all those changes back to Office 365 at any time. So lastly, in this case, user sync. How does all this happen? And many of you may be interested in password security, etc. So we have basically the following things occur. You see at the bottom of the screen our user portal. This is sort of the portal that your employees will log into to manage their identity in JumpCloud, changing their password, changing their name if they need to, among other, SSO and access, all that kind of stuff happens in the user portal. Same thing with the administrative console, which many of you are, of course, are admins, and you're probably in that product all the time. So through our API, from those endpoints, those user interface endpoints, we are pushing those changes into our core infrastructure, like a password change, for example. But here's one thing you need to know. JumpCloud never sees your user's passwords. We have extreme security around that, and of course, encryption that occurs from the endpoint through HTTPS, and then, of course, stored inside of JumpCloud. JumpCloud's storage engine never is storing your passwords. We never see the clear text. We only manage the hashes. And then, of course, as you see the transaction flow, that sort of green box you see is just an example of the password hash that we push from our API over into Office 365, and then it sits there. That's all that Office is managing. And whenever the end user is authenticating, we're just doing a handshake between the hashes between our products in a highly secure fashion. So in this case, that's exactly how this operates. And again, I stress, as an organization, your clear text passwords is never a variable. We never see them. We can't see them. We never store them, either in transit or at rest. So now let's talk about the nuts and bolts. We're now about to transition into some demo action that I think you guys will find interesting. But let's talk real quickly about the JumpCloud service, and then you'll see exactly what I'm going to demonstrate to you. So first and foremost, our DAS, what we call our directory as a service, it's an enterprise class directory. So I want to make that very clear. We've done this in a way that is built for the cloud age. It's 100% cloud-based, as you've seen in those architectural diagrams we just went through. But the team and I have a mission, and that mission is we want to bring directory services to our customers to never govern what choices they need to make with respect to infrastructure. Meaning, we don't care what cloud platform you want to use. AWS, Google Compute Engine, software, Rackspace, put your servers anywhere they want to. We'll connect to it. We don't care what your employees want to use with respect to their workstations. Mac, Linux, Windows, they're all first-class citizens. And the other aspect of this is we are protocol-driven. To do our jobs right, we have to embrace and move forward with growing our protocol support so we can centralize the identity and ensure it can connect to as much resource in your organization as possible. We do this now through our LDAP, Radius, and SAML endpoints, and as mentioned, a very robust API that gives you, frankly, headless operation, programmatic operation of our identity store to infrastructure that we don't, quote unquote, necessarily integrate with, but we certainly do through REST, which many of our customers do. As we like to say from a kind of a marketing perspective, think of us as an AD or an LDAP reimagined for 2016 and beyond. That's what we've created. When you look from a diagram perspective, it looks like this. JumpCloud is an authoritative directory that sits in the middle of your infrastructure. Everything from your directories like Google Apps and Office 365 to workstations, Mac, Linux, Windows, LDAP endpoints to legacy sort of infrastructure, Linux and or applications that can use an LDAP directory. In addition to Radius, making sure that your employees are not sharing a common SSID and password, but using their JumpCloud identities to connect securely to your wireless access points. And of course, as mentioned, infrastructure as a service. So we connect to any cloud that you want to be on, we support. In our demo today, here is a visualization of what I'm about to show you. First, I'm going to just show you the user interface of JumpCloud, but I'm going to do something interesting. And in fact, while I'm talking, I'm seeing some other very interesting questions come in on the chat. We have a guy who's saying, hey, we use both Google Apps and Office 365. How does this kind of work together? I'm going to show you that. I'm going to show you how a Google identity can become an Office 365 identity and get that thing spawned across and bound across lots of infrastructure. So we'll show that directly. So from there, we're going to show you, well, how do I get that identity onto workstations? I'll use Windows as an example today, but it could be the same process for Mac and Linux. So we'll show you binding to workstations. And we're going to end with some LDAP integration just to show you how one of our protocols truly integrates with the core identity store, JumpCloud's directory, out to legacy applications. I'll be using the Jira, the hosted Jira version of this, which I guarantee many of you use or have used, but you'll appreciate it because it's a common app and it's a great LDAP example. All right, so I've done enough slide talking. Let's show the bits. So let's go over into JumpCloud first. What you're seeing right now is JumpCloud's administrative console. Oh, yeah, I bet you're not seeing that because, guess what? I've got to share my screen. Please hold. Okie dokie. Now you guys should be seeing my screen. What you see here is JumpCloud's administrative console. Again, lots of you on this call are already customers, so it's like, yeah, Greg, I know this is what it looks like. For others that haven't seen JumpCloud, this is what you will see when you're operating your infrastructure, no matter where it lives. For everything from your users, as you see here, to the systems, again, Linux, Windows, and Mac are all managed centrally from this location out to wherever those endpoints live. You don't need a domain controller. You don't need, VPN clients just to connect to the directory, to the identity store to JumpCloud. It's all much more modern and progressive and agent-based. Every one of the machines that you see here in front of you has an agent installed on it that's communicating back through port 443, only outbound for secure reasons, just a standard port, to do check-in calls to the JumpCloud mothership, to your tenant on the JumpCloud mothership, I should say. So again, with a lot of the ones that you see in red, I just have offline. I've turned them off. I've otherwise shut the machine down. The ones in green are lit up, including this Windows 8.1 system that we're going to abuse today in my demonstration. JumpCloud also supports SAML and supports a number, virtually 100 applications now in our portfolio that you can assert the JumpCloud identity through the SAML protocol out through, so your employees can use their JumpCloud creds to securely sign into their web-based services, from Salesforce to DocuSign to Evernote to you name it, to Google Apps, etc. So just note that we have a full SAML engine behind the scenes here. I'm going to come back to directories in a second because we're going to spend a lot of time here, including our Google Apps and Office 365 support. But also note we have an Active Directory bridge for those that want to use JumpCloud as sort of a slave utility for your authoritative versions of AD. We're not going to show that off today. We're going to stay focused on Google Apps and, of course, while you're here, Office 365. Commands gives you as admins the capability to write code that could be PowerShell, Shell, Bash, it could be Python, a number of things, to execute delivery of the code against those system endpoints. So for example, you want to insert some policy, you want to install software on your employee's Windows machine, no problem. The agent there sitting on that box will enable you to execute that code against those endpoints. Finally, Radius we manage Radius as a service. You never have to manage a Radius server again, or an LDAP server for that matter. Very similarly, our Radius as a service gives you the capability to bind Radius infrastructure, Cisco Meraki wireless access points, VPN clients, whatever, and all can be tethered back to the JumpCloud identity. So your employees are using their own sign-ins, not some shared, creds anymore. So a great way to improve your security posture, just start here with JumpCloud's Radius as a service. One last thing. Note that JumpCloud also offers a very sophisticated password management system, including password complexity. This gives you the capability to have your employees maintain good health on their passwords and good rotation and complexity. What this means is you apply a policy like you see here, how many characters you want. I have a very weak one, just so I can get through my demos quick, so I don't have to write obscenely long passwords. But you can model your passwords with as much complexity as you want and enforce how many times a root password can be used and how often your employees need to rotate or otherwise change their passwords. So here's what I want to do in this demonstration. As mentioned before, I want to really exacerbate the real problem many of our customers have and use a bunch of services. And we're going to create a fictitious scenario of a pre-existing Google identity. I'm going to do this all on the fly. Everything you're seeing here is live, so if you see anything, apologies in advance. No you won't. It'll be super smooth. But we're going to go from Google. I'm going to take that Google identity, import it, own it in JumpCloud, and then spawn it, meaning bind it and integrate it with a bunch of other services, most importantly, watching how it becomes an Office 365 identity. So to do that, let's hop out of the JumpCloud administrative console and jump in to the Google console. If you don't use Google, welcome. This is what it looks like. This is what the admin console looks like. So let me just sign in. And great, we got our users. Not a lot of users in there because this is sort of our demo platform. And what I want to do here is on the fly create a brand new user inside Google. So I'm going to call this guy, let's make something up. Tim, what's a good name? How about Albert? Because that's the first thing on my mind, Fat Albert. All right, so I'm going to go tim.albert as the guy's username, and of course, demo JumpCloud is an actual, DNS that we have tied to both our Office 365 tenant and this Google tenant as well. So I'm going to create this guy, And nothing special. Thank you. Done. And let me just refresh because Google has a little refresh problem, I noticed. And wakey. Here, let's go. Maybe Google themselves, thank you, Google, for dropping him into the suspended mode. Let's light him up. And so thankfully this is Google's nice little issue going on here. I bet you we only have a limited amount of folks that we can add to our demo account here. Let me go back. Home. And I'm going to whack one of these guys. I'm going to just shoot this guy because we don't need him. And yes, I don't want any of your data. Many of you are now becoming more intimate with the sort of Google way of doing things than you've probably ever seen. So here's Tim. Hello. I am wondering why I can't import this guy. Or not import, but rather, unsuspend him. Thank you, Google, for this. So let's do this. We're gonna go and bypass you all together, Mr. Google, and we're going to build Tim directly inside of JumpCloud, like you're seeing here. So assume that I had imported him from our now badly behaving Google tenant. So I'm going to create Tim Albert. Same thing, tim.albert and tim.albert at demo.jumpcloud.com. Great. So as I'm building out this user, and of course, a lot of this data would have been inherited when I pulled it in from JumpCloud, I can do a couple of things here on the fly. First and foremost, what I want to do is get him bound to directories. So as an example, what this is doing is effectively saying, JumpCloud, you're going to own this identity, and if he was imported from inside of Google, we can then take ownership. So JumpCloud becomes the authoritative version of the Google identity. Same thing for Office 365. So right now, this user, Tim Albert, does not exist in O365. We're going to show how he ends up there in a second. But this is functionally how you're going to get Tim provisioned out to O365. And of course, had he been imported from Google, this is how you're going to take ownership of him. Meanwhile, I can also bind him to systems, which I'm going to show you in a second. Let's go into details. And what I'm going to do is give Mr. Tim here a password. And why I'm doing this is because I want to bypass the whole series of things of Tim receiving an email saying welcome to JumpCloud, set your own password. We're going to bypass that part just for this presentation. So I'm going to light him up. So great, I got his password in. He's bound to some directories. And I'm going to save him on this. Now he's an active member of JumpCloud. So let's take a look at him. Great. Tim Albert, you're green lit. You are good to go. So the other thing that I want to do is bind him to his machine. So I've got him on Google now. I own him in Google. I own him in Office 365, which I'll show you in a second. But I also need to get him on his box. So I mentioned before that I had this Windows machine. It's just a normal Windows 8.1. It could be Windows 10. It could be a Linux machine. It frankly could be a MacBook. But I'm just using Windows as an example here. I'm going to bind this guy Tim to his machine. And in fact, for a temporary time, I'm going to make him an admin because we'll pretend he's a new employee. And to be frank, I need to let him install some software. In a week or so, I'm going to take down his admin privs so he's only a standard user and can't, he has his software installed, but he can't muck about anymore with his Windows box. So for now, I'm going to make him an admin. Great. So I'm going to reassert a password again, just so I can get all that information out to his endpoint. And voila, we're done. So let's go take a look at some of those resources we just bound him to. First thing I'm going to go to is Office 365. Whoops, that's his portal. Let's go in here. Here is, sorry again, wrong window. Here is Office 365. So in this case, this is an admin portal that you guys are absolutely familiar with. It's our demo portal, but it's totally production. Let's go into active users, and voila, there's Tim. I provisioned him from JumpCloud into now our Office 365 tenant. Now, he had never existed before, so now I'm like, great, Tim is here. Let's give him some Office 365 licenses, etc., and now I can light him up. I'm going to give him, his Office 365 essentials, and great, he is now on his way, and he's good to go. All provisioned outside from JumpCloud as an active Office 365 user now. But I also showed him on the machine. So here's this Windows box that I was mentioning. Again, it could be a Mac. Let's go take a look. Here's admin. I'm just going to log in as the admin real quick. And I bet if I do a sign out right now, the machine, I just had to wake up the machine. Let's take a look. Voila. Here's Mr. Tim. So on this, let's go log in now using the JumpCloud password. This account has never existed on this Windows machine before. So as you'll see, using the JumpCloud password, great, Tim, here's your new box, here's your new creds, and we're setting up this user account for you. So many of you who use Windows know exactly what you're looking at right now. It's just the classic, sort of setup screen that you walk through when you're on Windows. Let's talk a little bit about what happened on this endpoint, on this Windows machine. I mentioned we have the agent installed. The agent is not doing any sort of non-sophisticated proxying of Windows. We are deeply integrated and securely integrated with the operating system itself. So we are interoperating with in this case, the module that manages user sort of permissions on Windows. Same thing for Mac, same thing for Linux, all in their respective protocols on those OSs. But in this case, Tim is logged in. We have, effectively created a new local user account on this machine. For the Windows geeks out there in the universe, if I go into PowerShell, so you can see what's been done under the covers. Let me remember, net user, I think we called him Tim.Albert. That's the same user here. As you can see, it is an actual local account, in this case Windows. You'd be seeing similar things on Mac OS X or Linux. But we give you the comment, this user account was added by JumpCloud. We tell you all of the local user groups that JumpCloud sort of made him. If you remember, I assigned him admin privs. So we are adding him to the admin local group membership on the box. And I will take that away and, of course, modify that membership once we, from the UI, set him back to standard user. That's how all this works. Another thing you need to know is on the Windows endpoint, if you have a pre-existing user, meaning if Tim Albert already lived on this box, we can bind and overtake pre-existing account memberships. We will not affect any home directories. In fact, it's totally silent. The only thing Tim will have to do is just reset his password, and then bam, it's just business as usual. It's life as normal. They log in as normal. He has to change his password every 90 days, whatever you have it set, to keep good health practices on, in this case, on Tim's machine. So now let's go back in and look a little deeper. So what have we done thus far? We've shown you JumpCloud. We had to, because of our Google snafu, pretend that we imported that guy from, in this case, from Google into JumpCloud. I sort of created the Tim Albert guy on the fly in JumpCloud. We bound him to Office 365, provisioning a brand new account, and we got him on his machine. But what about other things, other resources that Tim needs to go to? Let's go have a look. Let's say Tim is a a developer or a DevOps person, so he's sort of technical. We've got him provisioned out to his machine. He's going to use, that's his Windows workstation, but I need to get him on some other things, like some other resources, including Jira, right? So first and foremost, let's do this. Let's tags inside of JumpCloud. If you are familiar with, groups, security groups, or group of names, if you're an LDAP user, tags is exactly that. It's our grouping concept. We have some special sauce with our groups too, which enables you to not only use it just as a simple group membership function, but also can bind to machines too. So Tim, I need to get on this tag. He's an administrator on our Google Compute Engine infrastructure. So what I'm doing here is adding the membership of Tim to this group. So let's search for Tim. Here's Tim Albert. I will select you, Tim. And note that not only will he become a member of this group, but also will be bound as a user account to all of these machines. Instantaneously, I can grant him access on these boxes. So let's save the tag. All right, wonderful. He's there. I also need to get him on, let's say, some SSO. So he's going to need to get access to the IAM dashboard for Amazon Web Services. So I'll get him in here too. So let's take a look and find Tim. And here's Tim Albert again. Great, Tim, you are now saved and you can have access to IAM. And now let's take a look at how all this stuff operates. I've got him bound, remember, to that IAM, and I've got him bound to that admin Google Compute Engine infrastructure. Let's geek out and look at Google Compute Engine for a second. So here's, for many of you, you've never seen the Google Compute Engine. This is sort of like Azure, if you will. These are all my virtual machines that I'm running on Google Compute Engine, including this Linux box. So if I go into this, wrong window, go into the shell, and let's just do a user list. Voila, refresh. Tim is already there. You saw me bind him just through that tag. Instantaneously, I dropped that brand new user count on this CentOS, this Linux box. So great, I've tested that. Tim's good to go there. So what about Amazon? Remember, I put him on that security group for Amazon access. Let's go take a look at that. So Tim needs to get into his JumpCloud dashboard. Here's the login screen. Let's log in as Tim. tim.albert@demojumpcloud.com. And the password is, of course, the JumpCloud password that he created or I created. So I'm going to log in as Tim. Boom. Here's all Tim's info. I got to do a couple of things here. First, Tim hates the fact that someone named him Tim. He's very formal. He likes to call himself Timothy. All right? So I'm self-managing my information here, meaning I don't have to call an IT admin to say, oh my God, can you change my name in the Active Directory or some other directory? No, I can do that myself. I can also change any of my other info and, of course, my password at any time. So I'm going to save that change. Furthermore, I as an admin, was given, I gave this guy, Tim, access to Amazon. So I actually did a bunch of provisioning sort of automatically, so I knew Tim would get a bunch of access points. But if I click on the Amazon IAM dashboard, I can be asserted immediately into my dashboard like you're seeing here. All automated. This account never existed on Amazon. We use SAML to say, yes, you have been authenticated. Let me authorize you to get access to this dashboard, and you've just seen that live. But I also mentioned Jira. So let's take a look at Tim on Jira. I am going to go into this virtual machine. This is actually a Windows server that I'm running up in Google Compute Engine, but it's my own managed version of Jira. Sorry I'm being so cheap here. I haven't bought my expired license yet, but it works fine. And let's show you a little bit about how we tether a product like Jira to JumpCloud. If I go to my user directories, let me sign in again. It's been a little too long since I've last signed in. If I go into the Directories tab, I have Jira looking back to an authoritative directory, what I've called JumpCloud LDAP. But if I edit this, the LDAP nerds in the audience like me know that, oh wow, okay, I can see that JumpCloud has an exposed yet dedicated LDAP endpoint for your tenant to securely bind these resources. In this case, you're seeing me bind through port 636 using SSL, so highly secure. But it's straight up open LDAP. So we look to any of these applications like an open LDAP server. We're just proxying that LDAP in front of the core JumpCloud directory. So you can bind a bunch of stuff like legacy apps like this against your authoritative JumpCloud directory. But back to Tim, if I go into users, let's search for him. Oh, my bad. I have to synchronize because I got to bring the Tim account in. So notice here it's synchronizing. It's saying it found some different memberships. Great, the sync is done. And let's go look at Tim. So I'm going to do his username here, tim.albert, and let's filter that. And voila. You see now Tim's appropriate name, remember I changed it, or he changed it, Timothy Albert, and he's in the appropriate groups that I assigned him to that were LDAP groups. So I've got the admin GCE one that got him that access up to that Google Compute Engine Linux server you saw. So we're doing all the LDAP-backed group membership, and bam, he's been sort of provisioned out to that resource as well. So let's go back into JumpCloud, and we're going to sort of wrap up and sort of put some finishing polish on here. What you've seen, and if I wasn't talking and I was a real sysadmin, everything that I just operated would have been, a 90-second operation, literally, from importing to binding that user identity to many of its core sort of associated, resource endpoints. We did a bunch of them. We did Office 365. We did, the person's Windows machine. We did an LDAP endpoint. We even did a SAML endpoint to Amazon, and of course, showing you sort of the whole operation on the way. So on my clock, it's 12. I do want to take some time to answer maybe one or two questions. And please note the following. Myself and all of our success team are here to help you. You can email me directly at greg@jumpcloud.com, or to get more immediate assistance with my whole team, just use the support@jumpcloud.com email address for any of the questions that we will not get answered today. So with that said, let's take a couple of questions. So let's look at Andrew's questions first. He says, we use both Google Apps as our main thing in Office 365 with Amazon AWS and MS Azure. How would you consolidate the credentials into a single identity? I think I crushed that one, meaning I think by now, Andrew, you just saw it live in action. So I am not going to get into the nuances here between these two things. Note that you do have some domain discrepancies. The reality is your end user must have domain syncopation. When we do sort of a domain-to-domain kind of thing, meaning your Google Apps domain must utilize the same email as it will in your management console in AWS. Google and not AWS, but Office 365. Both of those can manage multiple domains. That is a prerequisite, so we can, ensure that it's the same identity moving across. In the future, a single identity may be able to manage multiple emails bound to its own unique tenant, just not at this time. So the next one. Cesar asked, how does privacy work? I think I walked through much of that in terms of our encryption and the fact that this company does not store passwords, and how we're communicating everything through secure protocols, either HTTPS and of course through deep protocols like SSL. The encryption algorithms, we're more than happy to walk you through under NDA. Obviously, that's a big part of our sort of, we want to keep you secure, so we'll talk to you about that in private. James asks, 50% of our workforce is mobile only, iOS and Android. How would JumpCloud function for those users? So I don't want to confuse the world right now. JumpCloud is not an MDM solution for iOS or Android devices. We haven't focused there yet. You watched me interoperate with Windows as well as Linux, and of course Mac OS X is supported. What we can offer is secure Wi-Fi and other protocol authentication from those mobile endpoints to your Radius-backed servers that JumpCloud is managing. So all of that kind of stuff is absolutely capable within the product, managing at that level. Of course, any of the SSO apps that we have SAML asserted, they will behave the same way. They all are going to defer back to the master identity. And if your service provider is looking back to an authoritative directory, an identity provider or IDP, the JumpCloud creds are going to be necessary to authenticate from their mobile phones. We have another question from Mike Tianello. What about cloud-hosted Jira? Good question. I would counsel you to bang on the doors of Jira, and unfortunately, from a SAML perspective and an LDAP perspective, the Atlassian folks haven't opened that up for the public. We have ways that we think we can do it, and we are working with Jira, but right now only self-managed instances of the Jira or Atlassian products like Confluence can look back to a directory like LDAP. Right now, I think that is all the questions that we have, and you guys have been super gracious on this call for just now an hour. We spent some deep time. I hope that this was valuable. It's incredibly hard to get a lot of this sort of information across in a really, really short time period when we're trying to sort of espouse many of the things that we do. So again, I reinforce to work with us at support@jumpcloud.com and ask us questions. And any member of my team or myself would be glad to jump on a Google Hangout and get things really deeply understood for you and to help you make decisions. With all this said, I really want to express my thanks on behalf of JumpCloud for staying with us for these 60-plus minutes, and we look forward to serving you with our directory as a service product. Thanks so much.